Hello everyone, I am very glad that you're joining this story. Subscribe, like and comment. Enjoy the story, smile more often.
For as long as I can remember, my family has treated me like their personal ATM, a never-ending source of money that they could tap into whenever they pleased, without the slightest hesitation or guilt. My name is Jessica, and my biggest crime, at least in their eyes, was daring to be successful. The moment my paycheck became bigger than theirs, the moment I secured a stable career with a salary that outshined the rest of them, it was as if an unspoken rule had been put into place. Jessica pays. At first, I thought it was just a one-time thing, a small favor here and there, an extra bit of generosity because I was in a better financial position. I told myself it was normal to help out your family, that it was part of being a daughter, a sister, an aunt. But the problem with generosity is that once people expect it, it stops being generosity, it becomes obligation. And obligation? That breeds resentment. It started small, like the first time my mother forgot her wallet at a restaurant and casually pushed the check toward me with an innocent smile, assuring me she'd get me next time. Next time never came. Then there were the birthday dinners, always at my expense, always at the most expensive restaurants they could find. It didn't even matter whose birthday it was, mine included, because somehow I was always the one footing the bill. The excuses were endless, and each one sounded more ridiculous than the last. Oh, Jess, you earn more, so it's only fair. Honey, your little nephew needs new clothes, and you know your brother can't afford them. Sweetie, I'm a little short on cash this month, and your dad's pension doesn't stretch very far. Every single time, it was wrapped in the same saccharine guilt trip, designed to make me feel like a bad person if I even considered saying no. And it worked. For years, I played along, nodding and smiling as I swiped my card, watching my bank account slowly bleed out so they could enjoy lobster dinners, expensive wines, and vacations they'd never have been able to afford on their own. The worst part? They never even thanked me. Not once did any of them acknowledge that I was the one making it all possible. Not once did anyone say, "Hey, Jess, we appreciate what you do for us." No, instead, they made it feel like it was my duty. Like it was my role in the family. And if I ever hesitated, even for a second, the passive-aggressive comments would start. Wow, must be nice to be rich. It's not like you have kids to support. You're being kind of selfish, don't you think? Selfish. Me. The one who had spent thousands, if not tens of thousands, covering their expenses, their luxuries, their irresponsibility. I was the selfish one because I didn't want to buy my sister-in-law a designer handbag for Christmas. I was the selfish one because I hesitated before paying for yet another round of drinks when they were already slurring their words and swaying in their seats. The realization hit me one night as I sat across from my family at a high-end steakhouse, watching them laugh and eat, completely oblivious to the fact that I was on the verge of screaming. The waiter placed the check on the table, and, like clockwork, they all ignored it. My mother didn't even glance at it before reaching for her purse, not to pay, of course, but to reapply her lipstick. My brother leaned back in his chair, patting his full stomach like he was some kind of king who had just feasted. My sister-in-law, Stacy, was still scrolling through the dessert menu, debating whether she wanted to add a $50 slice of cake to my bill. No one asked. No one even looked at me. They all just assumed I'd take care of it. That was the moment I realized. They don't respect me. They don't even see me as a person anymore. I'm just a wallet with legs. That night, when I got home, I stared at my bank statements, tracing every transaction, every dinner, every shopping spree that had been charged to me, and something inside me snapped. Then, as if the universe had a twisted sense of humor, my phone dinged with a text from my mother. "Oh, honey, let's do a family dinner this weekend. You don't mind covering, right?" She didn't even pretend anymore. I stared at the message for a long time, my fingers hovering over the keyboard, the old, familiar guilt creeping in like an unwelcome guest. I could already hear the excuses, the whining, the subtle jabs about how I was being dramatic or difficult. But this time, something was different. This time, I felt nothing. Then, suddenly, I felt something else. Amusement. Because for the first time in years, I realized I had the power. I took a deep breath and typed back, "Of course, Mom. Can't wait." But what I didn't say was that this time I had a plan. The moment I made the reservation, I felt something I hadn't felt in years when it came to my family, control, satisfaction, and the tiniest flicker of excitement at what was to come. I booked a table at Seal Blue, the kind of restaurant where they charge you for breathing their air, where even the cheapest glass of wine costs as much as a utility bill, and where the portions are delicate, but the price tag is anything but. My family had been dying to go there for months, ever since one of my mother's book club friends had posted a smug selfie next to a plate of gold leaf steak tartare, captioned, "Living my best life." And, of course, when my mother had hinted, for the 10th time, that it would be so wonderful if we could all have a special night out together, I had finally agreed, much to her delight. The moment she got my confirmation text, she was on the phone with my brother, no doubt gushing about how Jessie is finally being a team player, and see, I knew she'd come around. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had booked 2 tables that night. One for them, right in the center of the restaurant where they could bask in the glow of their own self-importance, and one for me, tucked away in a quiet corner where I could enjoy every second of the night on my own terms. That evening, I arrived early, dressed in my favorite black dress, the one that made me feel expensive, powerful, and untouchable. I walked in with my head high, let the host guide me to my secluded table, and ordered a glass of red wine that cost more than the knockoff designer bags my sister-in-law Stacy liked to parade around town. From my seat, I had a perfect view of the entrance, and as I swirled my wine, I watched as my family strolled in, laughing and talking, completely oblivious to my absence. I saw my brother, Mark, immediately make a beeline for the bar, ordering a whiskey older than his career ambitions. His wife, Stacy, examined the wine list as if she were choosing an engagement ring, no doubt searching for the most overpriced option, because, in her mind, expensive automatically meant better. My mother, always one for dramatics, pressed her hand to her chest and sighed as she took in the grandeur of the place, as if she were some sort of royalty finally being welcomed into the palace she had always deserved. They were having the time of their lives, basking in luxury they could never afford on their own, confident in the fact that, as always, I would be paying for it. And the best part? They had no idea I wasn't even there. I watched as the waiter approached their table, watched as my mother took control, waving her hands like a queen giving orders to her servants. She probably told them to bring out the finest champagne, something worthy of celebrating family togetherness, or some equally manipulative nonsense. My brother leaned back in his chair, already too comfortable, already settling into the idea that this was yet another night of indulgence, another evening where he could pretend to be the successful, well-off man he never actually was. I took a sip of my wine and let myself enjoy it. For years, every single dinner with them had been a slow-burn nightmare, a cycle of frustration, resentment, and barely contained rage as they took advantage of me over and over again. But tonight? Tonight was mine. I ordered my meal without hesitation, choosing the best cut of steak, the richest sauces, the sides I actually wanted instead of the ones they forced onto the table for sharing. No more watered-down cocktails to make my money stretch, no more picking the cheapest entree so I wouldn't feel like I was wasting my own paycheck while they ordered filet mignon and seafood towers without a second thought. As I cut into my perfectly cooked steak, savoring every bite, I thought about how easy it had been to set this all up, how simple it was to turn the tables on them when they had spent so many years taking me for granted. All it took was one tiny change to the plan, one reservation made for one person instead of 5. And just like that, the entire dynamic shifted. I wasn't the fool anymore. I wasn't the one being played. They were. They just didn't know it yet. I glanced down at my phone and saw that I already had 3 missed calls from my mother, no doubt wondering where I was, already concocting some kind of guilt-ridden speech to throw at me the second I walked through the door. I could almost hear her voice in my head, dripping with exaggerated concern, telling me how worried they were, how strange it was that I hadn't shown up yet, how it had been so rude of me to make them wait. I smiled to myself and took another bite. They weren't worried about me. They were worried about the bill. I let the phone ring again, watching as my mother's name flashed on the screen, her desperation growing with each unanswered call. I imagined the moment the check would arrive, the waiter politely informing them that the credit card on file was not mine, that they were responsible for the full amount, that there was no Jessica safety net to fall back on this time. And oh, I was going to savor that moment. I leaned back in my chair, took another sip of my wine, and let myself enjoy the night for the first time in years. Because tonight, for once, I was the one in control. I had barely finished the last bite of my steak when my phone buzzed against the table, the screen lighting up with a string of incoming messages that I had been expecting, but still found amusing nonetheless. My mother's name flashed first, followed almost immediately by my brother, and then Stacy, each text a frantic variation of the same theme, each one dripping with barely contained panic as they realized that, for the first time in years, I wasn't there to save them. Mom, Jess, where are you? Mark, WTF, Jess, get over here now. Stacy, the bill came. Where the hell are you? I didn't reply. Instead, I set my phone face down on the table, letting the notifications pile up while I savored the moment, letting my fork scrape lightly against the plate as I took another slow, deliberate bite. The restaurant was dimly lit, the quiet murmur of conversation around me creating a sense of calm that I hadn't felt in years, a stark contrast to the chaos that I knew was unfolding at the other end of the room. Somewhere across the restaurant, my family was sitting in stunned silence, staring at a check they had never expected to see, a check they had assumed would be swept away by my credit card without so much as a blink. But tonight, there was no safety net, no quick-fix solution, no Jessica to the rescue routine. Tonight, they were left with nothing but the consequences of their own entitlement, and I wanted to soak in every second of their realization. I imagined the exact moment the waiter had arrived, placing the bill carefully on the table before stepping back with polite patience, waiting for someone, anyone, to reach for it. I could picture it so clearly in my mind, the way my mother probably glanced around with a perfectly rehearsed expression of mild confusion, as if the very idea of acknowledging a bill was completely foreign to her. Mark, ever the confident one, likely leaned back in his chair at first, assuming I was simply running late, assuming that within moments, I would appear like I always did, wallet in hand, ready to take care of everything. But then, the confusion would have started to shift into something else realization. My mother, who had conveniently forgotten her purse more times than I could count, probably began rummaging through it in an exaggerated display of helplessness, flipping through compartments she knew damn well were empty. Mark, who always acted like a big shot despite having less than $50 in his checking account, was suddenly sweating, suddenly realizing that his smug attitude wouldn't be enough to cover a meal that cost more than his monthly car payment. Stacy, who loved to flaunt luxury as long as someone else was paying for it, was probably staring at the bill in horror, realizing that her $200 bottle of wine was now her problem. The thought sent a thrill of satisfaction through me, a slow, simmering kind of pleasure that I hadn't felt in years, the kind of satisfaction that only comes when justice is finally being served on a platter as rich and satisfying as the meal I had just devoured. My phone buzzed again, the notifications piling up at an almost comical rate. Mom, Jessica, this isn't funny. Get over here now. Mark, are you seriously doing this right now? Stacy, they're talking about calling the manager. Do something. I almost laughed out loud. Calling the manager? What exactly did they think a manager was going to do? Apologize and magically erase the charges just because my mother batted her eyes and claimed she had been misled into thinking her adult children wouldn't have to pay for their own meal? The best part was that I knew, deep down, that none of them were actually broke. It wasn't that they couldn't afford to pay, it was that they had never been forced to before. It was the principle of it, the sheer audacity of me daring to make them take responsibility for something they had always assumed was my burden to bear. I picked up my wine glass, swirling the deep red liquid slowly before taking a sip, savoring the moment, letting the silence stretch between us. Then, with the same calm confidence that they had spent years stripping away from me, I flagged down my waiter with a smile. "I'll take the dessert menu," I said, my voice smooth, my expression utterly relaxed. If my family was in the middle of a financial crisis, well, that sounded like a them problem. Tonight, I was going to enjoy every last bite of my freedom. As I lifted my fork to take another bite of my creme brulee, my phone buzzed against the table again, the vibrations growing more frantic with each passing second, as if the sheer force of their desperation might somehow will me into submission. I let it ring, let the messages stack up, let the sheer weight of their panic pile onto itself until it became something almost comical. Something so absurd that I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from bursting into laughter in the middle of this perfectly serene dining room. Mom, Jessica, this isn't funny. Come pay this bill right now. Mark, you're gonna embarrass us all, you psycho. Get back here. Stacy, they're talking about calling the cops. Seriously, what is wrong with you? The sheer audacity of it nearly made me choke on my dessert, the absurdity of their entitled panic washing over me like the most satisfying wave of justice I had ever experienced. Calling the cops? Over a dinner bill? What exactly did they think was going to happen? Were they going to claim that I had committed some elaborate fraud, that I had lured them into a high-end restaurant under false pretenses, that I had somehow tricked them into ordering a 5-course meal complete with overpriced cocktails and extravagant appetizers? I imagined the scene unfolding at their table, the way my mother was probably gripping the bill in one perfectly manicured hand while dramatically clutching her chest with the other, gasping as if she had just been personally victimized by the very concept of financial responsibility. I pictured Mark, red-faced and fuming, frantically swiping through his banking app, realizing with dawning horror that his usual routine of spending recklessly and assuming someone else would pick up the tab had finally caught up with him. And Stacy, oh, Stacy, probably sitting there with wide, panicked eyes, wondering if she could bat her lashes at the waiter and convince him to magically erase the total. Wondering how she was going to explain to her Instagram followers why she had to cancel her weekly nail appointment just to pay for the wine she ordered. I swirled my spoon through the rich vanilla custard, tapping the caramelized sugar crust with the edge of my fork, savoring the way it cracked under the pressure, watching as it gave way just the way I had always given way to their endless demands. But tonight, I didn't give in. Tonight, they were the ones scrambling. Tonight, they were the ones feeling the sharp edge of reality pressing down on them, forcing them to take a hard look at themselves, at their expectations, at the way they had spent years demanding without gratitude, taking without limit, assuming without question. And it was beautiful. My phone vibrated against the table again, but this time it wasn't a message, it was a call. The screen lit up with my mother's name, her picture flashing in front of me, a photo she had forced me to take on her last birthday, the one where I had spent an entire paycheck making sure she had exactly the kind of celebration she wanted. I let it ring, watching as the seconds ticked by, letting her voice go straight to voicemail, knowing full well that she wouldn't be able to help herself, that she would leave a message, that her desperation would spill over into the recording, each word dripping with the kind of entitlement that had led us to this moment in the first place. And sure enough, a few moments later, the notification popped up. I tapped the screen and lifted the phone to my ear, leaning back in my chair, closing my eyes as my mother's voice poured through the speaker, sharp and urgent, the kind of tone she reserved for when she didn't get what she wanted. Jessica, she hissed, her voice low but seething, as if she were trying to keep herself composed in front of the other diners, trying to maintain appearances even as the walls started to crumble around her. I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but this is completely unacceptable. You need to get over here right now and take care of this because this is a family dinner and families take care of each other. I almost laughed out loud at that last part, the sheer hypocrisy of it nearly too much to handle. Families take care of each other? Since when? Since when had they ever taken care of me? Since when had they ever offered to cover a meal, to take the burden off my shoulders, to even acknowledge the fact that I had been single-handedly funding their luxuries for years? The voicemail continued, my mother's voice growing sharper, more frantic, more desperate. This is humiliating, Jessica, she spat, her anger barely concealed under a thin layer of forced patience. I don't know what you're trying to prove, but we don't have time for this nonsense. Mark and Stacy are already upset, and frankly, I don't blame them. You're being incredibly childish right now, and if you think this is funny, let me assure you, it isn't. I glanced across the room, casually searching for their table, spotting them almost immediately. My mother was gripping her phone tightly, her knuckles white, her lips pressed into a thin, furious line. Mark was arguing with the waiter, his hands gesturing wildly, while Stacy sat frozen in her seat, her expression unreadable but her posture stiff, as if she were still hoping, still praying, that this was all just a temporary glitch in the system and that I would swoop in at the last second to fix everything, just like I always had. But I wouldn't. Not tonight. Not ever again. I deleted the voicemail without a second thought, setting my phone down, picking up my fork and taking another bite of my dessert. The rich, smooth vanilla and caramel melted against my tongue, the taste of freedom lingering long after I swallowed. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't the one being used. For the first time in years, I wasn't the fool. For the first time in years, I was free. By the time I finally picked up my phone, the screen was glowing with notification after notification, each missed call and frantic message piling up like the wreckage of a disaster they never saw coming. My mother had called me 18 times, Mark had called me at least 10, and even Stacy, who usually preferred passive-aggressive texts over direct confrontation, had left me more than a few angry voicemails. I stared at the numbers flashing in front of me, my fingers hovering over the screen, debating whether I should even bother calling back, debating whether any part of me still felt the old obligation, the old pull to fix things, to smooth things over, to play the role of the responsible one while they got to act like helpless children. But something inside me had shifted tonight, something had finally snapped in a way that couldn't be reversed, something had broken free that I wasn't willing to shove back into its cage. They weren't panicking because they missed me. They weren't worried because they thought something had happened to me. They weren't desperately trying to reach me out of love or concern. They were panicking because they had to pay their own damn bill. That thought alone was enough to make me smirk as I finally tapped the screen and called my mother back, bringing the phone to my ear, already bracing myself for the storm of hysteria that was about to hit me like a tidal wave. She picked up before the first ring even finished, her voice coming through the speaker so fast and sharp it almost made me pull the phone away from my ear. "Jessica," she hissed, her voice dripping with barely contained rage, the kind of rage that came not from being hurt but from being inconvenienced, the kind of fury that people like my mother reserved for situations where they didn't get exactly what they wanted. "How could you do this to your own family? Do you have any idea what you've put us through tonight? Do you have any idea how embarrassing this was for me? For all of us?" I let her rant, let the words spill out in that familiar, accusatory tone, let her voice rise and fall in that theatrical way she always used whenever she wanted to make herself sound like the victim. I leaned back in my chair, swirling the last sip of my wine in the glass, taking my time, letting her feel every second of silence stretching between us, every beat of my indifference pressing into her frustration like salt in a wound. When she finally stopped for air, I let the quiet settle for a moment, let her sit with the weight of her own anger before I finally spoke, my voice calm, even, untouched by the hysteria she was drowning in. "You always said it was fair that I paid," I said, my words slow and deliberate, letting each syllable land with purpose. "Well, tonight it's fair that you do." The silence that followed was deafening. For the first time in what felt like forever, my mother didn't have an immediate response, no quick retort, no well-practiced manipulation, no instant shift into guilt-tripping mode. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head, almost hear her scrambling to find the next move, the next angle, the next ploy to get me to cave like I always had before. And then, just as I expected, just as predictably as ever, she softened her tone, shifting from anger to something that almost sounded like concern, like pleading, like a mother simply asking her daughter for a little help. "Jessie, sweetie," she murmured, her voice suddenly dripping with fake sweetness, the way it always did when she was about to lie through her teeth. "I just didn't bring enough cash. I wasn't expecting this, you know that, right? I thought we were all just going to have a nice evening together. I thought you wanted to do something special for the family. Can't you just come help your poor mother out?" For a second, just a second, I felt it, that old, familiar pull in my chest, that flicker of guilt, that tiny, instinctive voice inside me whispering that it would be easier to just cave, to just go there, swipe my card, and avoid the inevitable fallout that was going to come from standing my ground. And then I remembered. I remembered all the times I had bailed them out without so much as a thank you, all the times I had paid for dinners I barely got to enjoy, all the times I had drained my own bank account so they could sit there with full stomachs and smug smiles while I swallowed my resentment along with my overpriced meal. I remembered how many times I had been made to feel selfish for wanting something as simple as fairness, how many times I had been called dramatic, unreasonable, difficult, simply for wanting them to carry their own weight for once. I took a deep breath, letting it settle in my chest, letting the reality of the moment root itself deep inside me, and then I exhaled, slow and steady, letting go of the last bit of hesitation I had left. "Mom," I said, my voice as calm as ever, as steady as stone. "If you can't afford it, maybe you should stop ordering the lobster." And then, before she could unleash another desperate attempt to manipulate me, before she could shift back into full guilt trip mode, before she could throw out another excuse, another lie, another plea, I hung up. I set my phone down on the table, watching as the screen dimmed, watching as the notifications stopped for the first time in hours, watching as the chaos that had been pulling at me for so long finally faded into the background, leaving me with something I hadn't felt in a very, very long time. Peace. The check for my own meal arrived a few minutes later, and I paid for it without hesitation, without resentment, without that old, bitter taste in my mouth that had followed every other bill I had ever covered for them. Because this time, it was my choice. This time, I had only paid for myself. This time, the only person I was responsible for was me. And as I stepped out of the restaurant and into the cool night air, I knew, without a single doubt, without a single ounce of regret, that this was the start of something new. I wasn't their wallet anymore. I wasn't their safety net anymore. I was free,